everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno here with my co-hosts Kayleigh McEnany and Harris Faulkner. And also joining us today, the host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy, and Fox News contributor Guy Benson. Now we begin with the new developments in the case against former President Donald Trump. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's office attempting to punch back and has issued a response to top House Republicans demanding that he testify before Congress and turn over documents related to his investigation into the former president. His spokesman telling Fox News Digital, "We will not be intimidated by attempts to undermine the justice process, nor will we let baseless accusations deter us from fairly applying the law. In every prosecution, we follow the law without fear or favor to uncover the truth. Our skilled, honest, and dedicated lawyers remain hard at work." Fox News is also learning that grand jury will hear from another witness tomorrow as part of the investigation into a hush money payment made by President Trump's former attorney Michael Cohen to adult film star Stormy Daniels in 2016. Guys, so much to unpack here, but the bottom line for many of us who live in New York City and those of us who haven't been living under a rock, the response by DA Bragg's office is frankly laughable, that they consider this a prosecution without fear, without favor, commitment to justice, as everyone around them under their watch bleeds out under their watch.
Well, I saw that Politico described Alvin Bragg today as by the book and politics averse, so that's a different universe as well. I mean, this is someone who does not apply the law the way that you just described or the way that that statement describes. I think everyone understands that. I was thinking about this because there's a whole array of legal trouble potentially for former President Trump, and I think there are varying degrees of seriousness of some of these potential charges coming down the pike here in New York, in Georgia, the federal investigations. I do wonder if this one comes first as an indictment, as seems likely, could that have, at least from the Trump camp's perspective, something of a cascading effect when it comes to legitimacy, where they can say, this is so clearly political, and I would argue perhaps even an abuse of office, especially given Bragg's MO, where they can say the very first domino to fall maybe is not illegitimate, but we all understand that this is politics being played, and they might then say, well, you know, in Georgia you had that weird foreperson on the grand jury who was obviously partisan. And then, you know, in the federal investigation, one aspect of that is classified documents, where the current president has his own problems. So you can almost see how the Trump people would respond to any number of future indictments. And I think their task in terms of pushing back would be made easier if Alvin Bragg moves first with this garbage.
Right, and that's exactly sort of the point we spoke about yesterday, you know, is it an Onion headline? Thanks for putting Trump in office, DA Bragg. It is so laughable, so unserious, it's difficult to take it as truly, again, this pursuit of true justice, as he says. Kayleigh, what's partly in terms of the laughability of the dominoes as they play out is the lack of objectivity coming out of that office, especially when you bring Mark Pomerantz into play there, right? So this was one of the two prosecutors investigating Trump that resigned in protest after when Alvin Bragg joined office or was elected or appointed in office in 2022. He resigned in protest when Alvin Bragg said, yeah, there's really nothing more to investigate here. The DOJ has declined to prosecute. The FEC has declined to prosecute. There's really nothing here. Pomerantz, we recall, was brought from a law firm. He was not a prosecutor, a law firm that, ironically, Chuck Schumer's brother practices at and is the heavy donor to Hillary Clinton. So in terms of the deck being stacked, it doesn't seem that that was a objective prosecutor pursuing justice to begin with.
No doubt. So they called this case reportedly a zombie case in the DA's office. Why? Because as you point out, SDNY, Southern District of New York, didn't bring the case. An FEC commissioner shed doubt on the legal theory of the case. Cy Vance, the prior DA, did not bring the case. It was a zombie case. Pomerantz, as you said, had interest in it. So what would the interest be of Alvin Bragg to bring forward a case that had been previously dismissed as not being on legally firm footing? Why would you bring a case that you are going to lose? I can't get in Alvin Bragg's head, but I can postulate two possible motives. One is this Pomerantz individual. What happened to Pomerantz when he resigned in protest? I want to take down Trump and you wouldn't let me. Well, Jonathan Turley, here's his quote. He, meaning Pomerantz, was of course an instant success in the media that had spent years highlighting a dozen different criminal theories that were never charged against Trump. Pomerantz followed the time-tested combination for success, link Trump to any alleged crime, convey absolute certainty of guilt for cable TV shows. It was like a heroin hit for an audience and a long, agonizing withdrawal, and his campaign worked. Bragg caved. So number one, if Alvin Bragg brings this case, he is a national media figure. He is a national political figure. He wants to run for governor of New York. Man, he's posturing himself well to do that in blue New York. We're told by the New York Times that he's uninterested in political calculations. He'd be the first politician I've ever met that's uninterested in political calculations. So really quickly, possible motive number two, Kathy Hochul gets tired of crime in New York and says, Alvin Bragg, you're out the door. This insulates him from ever being fired by the governor of New York, because you can't fire the guy who indicted Trump.
Which is so ironic considering that in Governor Hochul's first day of office, she sent a scathing warning letter to the DA, essentially saying, if you don't shape up and start prosecuting actual crimes here in this city, I'm going to get you out of office.
Yeah, and when Lee Zeldin was running for governor, there were a lot of us that were hoping he would be victorious, because he said on day one he would remove Alvin Bragg from office because he's such a danger to the city. He doesn't care about criminal justice reform. It's this, radical DA orthodoxy that has infected so much of the country. And I really think that this case, a misdemeanor, like a cut and dry misdemeanor that he has upgraded to a felony, is just a distraction from how horribly he's doing. And everyone's got a phone. Everyone's got a camera on them at all times. So we see people savagely beaten in broad daylight by multiple suspects who know they're not going to get charged in Bragg's New York. So you can try to distract from that. I wish he had that same kind of urgency prosecuting violent crimes, crimes against Asian Americans, crimes against Jewish people, that he does prosecuting a former president.
That's right, and it's difficult, too, to stomach in light of that, and in light of what you were saying, the four arenas, essentially, that the former president is being investigated under, each one lessens the virtue of the other when taking into account all of these factors everyone's been mentioning.
So it begs the question, if you were going to posture a case against Trump and hope to get an indictment, why would you start with the biggest loser? Mm-hmm. Like, why would you start with a case that technically isn't a crime in the state of New York? I mean, maybe hush money is in other places, but it isn't here. Maybe an NDA wouldn't stand anywhere else, but it stands here. And, just in terms of the witness, and I know we saw what attorneys will call an impeachment witness with the former attorney Robert Costello going before the grand jury yesterday and saying Michael Cohen, the key witness against Trump right now, is a liar, and he is that. And he can't be trusted, and he can't be. I mean, he's stating all the obvious. I don't know if that helped in the Trump case or not, but it just sort of brought up again how weak this case is if it's based on a liar. If all of it is based on somebody who in any other circumstance you might not trust their evidence. So why would you start with this particular case? Is it because it really isn't the worst of them and this is the best that you've got? And yeah, it may put Alvin Bragg, if he gets indicted. I don't think Trump's going to get indicted based on this case. I think it's too weak, and it makes Alvin Bragg look like he's got bad judgment in terms of what wins. Mm-hmm. And he's not concentrating on crime. It's just a shiny object away from where he's failing. All of that. But let's just pretend for a second it goes forth, and the case goes nowhere. Where does that leave? Well, Trump can fundraise off of it. Mm-hmm. And make him even bigger. I don't know that you get the spectacle that you're hoping for that's positive as Alvin Bragg. I think it's a powder keg. And what if Kathy Hochul decides, well, if that's how you're going to spend the taxpayer money and you're going to do that, would she fire him because he's not doing the job of fighting crime? Or would she be too afraid because, maybe Democrats will like him because he went against Trump? I don't know how strong those ties are, but they're yoked to the wrong thing. Let go of the politics. Concentrate on your citizens. Yep. It's always a winner.
Oh, but he's scrupulously apolitical. Politico and the New York Times told us that.
Buy the book.
Who would put that memo out? I would love to know.
It's amazing how they don't see him. They see someone else.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of, sometimes the brightest stars of the moment, they burn themselves out, like an Avenatti. I wonder if that's what's going to happen to Bragg. Hey everyone, I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.